So continuing on our pathway, your mouth forms the food that you bring into it into a bolus. And it's important to know what food is called at different locations in the digestive tract. So the bolus moves from the mouth to the stomach. So that's what it's called when it's in the throat and down into the esophagus all the way until it gets to the stomach. The pharynx is your throat, and that's a tube through which a bolus of food passes when moved from the mouth to the esophagus by the process of deglutition or swallowing. The esophagus extends from the pharynx to the stomach, and it's the first segment of the digestive tube. It pierces the diaphragm at the esophageal hiatus. If you remember when we talked about body cavities, you had the abdominal cavity and the thoracic cavity, and the thoracic cavity had the lungs, the pericardial cavity, and then abdominal cavity and thoracic were completely separated by this diaphragm. Well, your mouth is up here and your stomach's down here. So we have to have a tube go through the diaphragm to get to the stomach. The hole where that pierces the diaphragm is known as the esophageal hiatus. If you've ever heard of a hiatal hernia, it's when part of the stomach bulges up through this into the thoracic cavity. Makes it a little difficult to breathe when you have a big chunk of your stomach hanging out inside of your thoracic cavity. So that can cause some problems. Usually, if you just calm down and breathe carefully and slowly, this can kind of work its way down, but it could require surgical repair to kind of tighten up that esophageal hiatus. Each end of the esophagus is encircled by muscular sphincters, the upper and lower esophageal sphincters. So here's a picture of the esophagus, and it goes behind the trachea like we talked about, and here's that esophageal hiatus, and then it goes into the stomach. The stomach has 4 major regions. The cardia is this initial region that food is going to enter into. The fundus is here. The body makes up a majority of the stomach. And then the final segment of the stomach is the pylorus. Then there's the greater and lesser curvatures. The greater curvature is on the left side of the stomach, and the lesser curvature is on the right side of the stomach. The stomach has rugae. And rugae are the folds, and you can see those folds here. It's kind of like, in the olden days when they used to do their laundry, they would wash their clothes on a washboard, and you probably don't even know what that is anymore, but that's what they used to do. Anyways, so inside of the stomach, there's these ridges, and as food goes across those ridges, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. That's what rugae are. So the rugae are those ridges. In those ridges are gastric pits, and the gastric pits contain a lining of the different types of cells that are going to produce digestive enzymes and hormones that are going to aid in the digestive process. Gastric glands contain the cells that are going to aid in digestion. Chief cells produce pepsinogen. Parietal cells produce hydrochloric acid. And the endocrine cells produce gastrin and ghrelin. Gastrin is going to promote the digestive process. Ghrelin makes you hungry. And coming back to this pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen is an inactive form of an enzyme. When you add hydrochloric acid to it, the pH drops, and it converts pepsinogen into this pepsin, which is the active form of the enzyme. And pepsin is going to digest proteins. So hydrochloric acid does not do the digestion, and that's something that a lot of people think that, oh, hydrochloric acid burns apart my food. That's not true. All hydrochloric acid does is create the acid environment that activates the enzyme pepsin. Pepsin is the enzyme that's actually going to cleave the bonds through hydrolysis, breaking apart amino acid chains. So pepsinogen combines with this hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid doesn't really become a component of the pepsinogen. It just decreases the pH and it activates pepsinogen into pepsin. Pepsin is the active form of the enzyme, and that's going to digest proteins. You do need to know which cells produce what and what these things are doing for digestion. So food is going to slosh around in the stomach back and forth, and there's different types of contractions that happen in order to break down the material into smaller pieces. Eventually, small quantities of the food that was digested in the stomach will start to pour into the duodenum. The peritoneum is the membrane that surrounds the abdominal wall. Included in this is the mesentery. The mesentery anchors the intestines to the abdominal wall, and the transverse mesocolon anchors the transverse colon to the abdominal wall. Food moves through your digestive tract pretty quickly, and it can go really fast if stimulated by certain bacterial toxins, or sometimes excessive amounts of fats can stimulate an increase in intestinal motility. As the food is going through, we want to prevent twisting of the intestine. So all of the intestines are carefully laid in the abdominal cavity and anchored so that there's only one way that food can move through, and so that the intestines can move past each other without twisting on each other. So this mesentery and transverse mesocolon kind of holds everything in place so that it can move through pretty quickly without twisting. The small intestine. So it's a tube approximately 2.5 centimeters in diameter and 6 meters in length. Divisions of the small intestine include the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. On the inside of the small intestine, you'll see ridges. They kind of look like rugae, but we don't call them rugae, we call them villi. And these are visible with the naked eye. You can see these infoldings in the inside of the intestine. The villi are lined with brush border cells. So here you can see a villus kind of blown up, and the brush border cell on the surface of the villi. Each brush border cell has microvilli, and microvilli increase the surface area for the absorption of nutrients. If we didn't have microvilli, let's say we just had a row of cells, and we wanted to absorb nutrients, and we'll put the little nuclei in the cell, and we wanted to absorb nutrients into the bloodstream from the lumen of the intestine. We would go through to absorb it into the blood. But if our cell had microvilli on it, the microvilli serve as extensions of the cell membrane. So now instead of just absorbing across one surface, you can absorb nutrients across every single one of these infolded surfaces. So microvilli increase the surface area for the absorption of nutrients. Makes absorbing nutrients a little bit more efficient. And then this lacteal. A lacteal is a lymphatic vessel. And its job is to absorb fats from the intestine, and that's going to dump into that cisterna chyli. If you recall from the lymphatic system lectures, that cisterna chyli collects all of the fats from the intestines because the fats cannot go directly into the bloodstream. They first have to enter into the cisterna chyli, and then they can make their way to the liver for processing so that the fats can be transported by certain types of proteins.